Frequently, as artists, it's easy to imagine that unless we have a large amount of time to create our art, 6 hours, 8 hours a day, 12 hours a day, 16 hours a day, unless you can really go to your cozy place, have a perfect studio, and get into that ultimate creative rhythm, that there's no point in even starting, that you'll never be able to create anything of meaning. You'll never be able to create anything really, really great. But what if I told you that not only can you get good things done by chipping away at them over 10 or 15, maybe half an hour little sessions, but that this practice will actually help you to build a really important, strong creative muscle that will not only allow you to connect with your artistic self in a much deeper way, to make better use of those larger 5 or 6 hour sessions when you get to them, but also teach you how to do something much, much more important, which is how to create a larger project. Because ultimately, great things are made by small steps. Welcome to the Visual Scholar Podcast. My name's Mcburnie. I have been a professional working artist for over 20 years. And on this show, we're all about demystifying the worlds of art, creativity, and productivity so that you can get better faster and enjoy your artistic journey. Check out my free brainstorming toolkit. If you want to take your art to the next level and really improve your skills, one of the best ways is to create your own personal artistic project. And to do that, you need a great idea. An idea that you're passionate about, that is unique and original to you, that is going to allow you to see this project through. I've taken the same tools and frameworks that I use every day and created a workshop on world building, ideation, and brainstorming. In it, you'll learn things like how to quiet the editing mind, how to enhance your blue sky brainstorming ability, and how to use brainstorming anchors for things like story or even your pre-existing ideas and proclivities as an artist. This is a free training. I think you're really going to enjoy it. So if that is something you're interested in, go check it out. The link will be in the description. So this idea is something that I run into quite a bit, talking to a lot of students, and also from my life, I have certainly experienced this idea where it felt like because I either didn't have enough time in my life to really sit down and create meaningful work, or even at times when I did, that because I couldn't really sit down and get my stuff sorted and actually put in that amount of time, that it felt like I was never really going to get anywhere. That without actually sitting down and going into flow and getting into a good creative rhythm, nothing was actually going to be possible. And I think this actually holds a lot of people back, both for artists who are trying to really figure out how to manifest your time and make the best use of a full day or a full week or a full month, but also for people who are trying to do this as a hobby or part-time. Or for a lot of us who are already professional artists, it can be a real challenge to figure out how to get that personal project happening. And this can be really critical. A lot of people imagine that once you have a creative job that everything's sorted, but often we do need either a creative outlet or we are really trying to still build our folio to create something really interesting as a side project. And often it feels like unless you can sit down for at least 4 hours, right? At least like a really good chunk of time, that you're never going to be able to get into that creative rhythm. And we're never going to be able to get anything done. I think this is often just a major challenge. And what it does is it often robs us of the ability to just jump in and see what happens. So what I want to talk about in this video is the concept of what I like to call chipping away at a larger project. And a big part of this is building that muscle and understanding how focus works, how learning works, and how a lot of the creative process functions. So there's a lot of different components to this. I think this is a really, really fun, important idea, but it is, on the one hand, the ability to just build a little habit where you flip open your sketchbook, you're able to get a lot more done. You open up your iPad, you can kind of chip away at something. But also, just to tackle this fundamental low-level challenge that we have as artists, where often there's this friction that comes up where you go to create. And the more pressure you put on yourself as an artist to actually like get a lot of effort, like get a lot of impact from those larger sessions, the more pressure we put on ourselves, the harder it is to actually perform, and often the more friction there is. And I think this is often where a lot of artistic block and a lot of these kind of weird things we have come from, is we just don't have that ability to say like, hey, I'm just going to pick up my sketchbook. I'm just going to sit down. I'm going to do some art. That we're often building up a big barrier there by not building that muscle of open the sketchbook, sit down, draw, have fun, just get into that flow quickly. So there's a lot of different components to this, and we're just going to unpack them here one by one. Firstly, I'm going to talk about how we can understand how focus functions, how flow functions, and how smaller sessions of creation really kind of fit into this. And the next thing I want to talk about is, again, the advantages of actually building this muscle, right? Yes, it can be fun to just be able to get some more work done here and there, but actually I think this goes a lot deeper. And lastly, I want to talk about how this idea of chipping away at something is a really, really important thing to learn, because it's often at the root of creating really amazing, great things ultimately. And I think we can learn a lot about it by, again, just building this muscle of opening up the sketchbook and drawing or creating or doing whatever you want, but building a really positive, fun relationship to that. So let's look a little bit at, I guess we could call it the science or the theory of focus and flow and what we're actually doing when we're sort of sitting down to draw. Now, my general thesis here is that drawing is a physical modality. It's a physical process. We need to learn it in the same way that you would a physical skill or a physical activity. And also that it does require the same type of focus where you go into a state of flow. You really go into your nice creative space. And often, having this larger period of time often facilitates that, because it's a lot easier to get rid of distraction, right? If I have my little studio here, it's very easy for me to just go into that creative space. There's no distraction. There's no nothing. And I think that's often why we crave that ability to have our sort of uninterrupted working time or uninterrupted creative time, because getting distracted while you're in a really good creative space is immensely frustrating. So let's unpack some of this a little bit, and also look at how, yes, that's true, but there's also a lot of other things I think that are true that mean that we can get a lot more done than we think by just spending these kind of smaller 10, 15 minute, half an hour sessions. So if I go back and think about early on when I was trying to figure out this artistic game, it really did feel as if this concept of getting into a good creative flow was ephemeral. It was like trying to grab a wet fish, right? You kind of got it and then it slips out, and then you've got it and then it kind of slips away. And that you can feel as if you've kind of unlocked some special, mystical, new part of the universe when you have this kind of long session where you just kind of go into this great creative space. Everything tends to work. And maybe the next day you kind of wake up and it's not there anymore, right? It feels as if we often do have this relationship with going into that good creative mindset. And I think this was just one of the biggest frustrations. And I think that certainly having longer sessions and having that uninterrupted time does help with this. It helps us build that capacity. But one of the things that we know about focus is that a lot of productivity, and a lot of the way that I think we think about productivity more and more, is a little bit against the common wisdom these days of having the 9 to 5, where you come in at 9 and you're online, and then you have to work until finally at 5 o'clock you can give up, go home, and stop. If you go back 100 years, 200 years, you look at the artistic rituals of great creatives, and I'm sure a lot of people had naps. A lot of people just went to sleep in the afternoon because that's kind of what your body is telling you to do, and that they still manage to get a lot of stuff done. So it's important to understand that a lot of the habits we have as a society, especially in industrialized Western society, these don't necessarily match up with the known science of how humans work. And there's not really much evidence that that is actually that much more productive than anything else. It is just sort of habit, right? It's just kind of we all have to be in these office buildings and going to work at these particular times, and people are paying us for that time, so you better work the whole time. There's not a lot of effort put into does that actually work? And what you kind of understand the more you get into productivity, especially for artists, because artists are a little bit different, is a lot of over the long term, say over like a month or 6 months of like really getting stuff done and making like an important, significant project, is that it's about energy management and energy capture, of making sure that you capture as much really positive, good, creative energy in your life and channel it towards making awesome stuff. And this is a little bit different for everyone because we have a number of these different physical rhythms that, again, a 9-to-5 schedule does not take into account. And this can be even more frustrating and challenging if you already have a 9-to-5 schedule and you're trying to fit and manage and capture energy outside of that schedule, because you don't get the same amount of flexibility. Often, we're managing multiple different rhythms within our body. Some people are just going to naturally get up in the morning, and some people are naturally not. There's a lot of suggestion that this is just a genetic component, that there's a distribution within the population of people who are just keyed to get up early versus those who are keyed to stay up late at night. And that probably this evolved because it would allow people to be alert in a smaller tribal society and then protect each other. So yeah, I'm going to be the one to get up early and you're going to be one to stay up late. And then together we got someone tending the fire and watching out for things throughout the whole period. And yeah, you might have a couple of people who are real weirdo night owls, right? They just stay up all night. Again, that's fine. That's good. We work together. Doesn't really work in the individualized industrial society that we have. Again, for better or worse, again, there's lots of positives and negatives to all of this, but we just have to understand our place in this as artists. So you may just have a genetic component which is going to allow you to be not focused at a particular time. And then we have our circadian rhythm, which is just the understanding that based on the day-night cycle, you're going to have focus and unfocused and periods of rest and alertness. And then you often lay on top of that like the ultradian rhythm, which is to say that, over a 90-minute period or like an hour, we kind of have this sine wave of like focus and relaxation. Even when you're asleep, there are periods where you're less asleep and more asleep. Even when you're awake, there are periods where you are more awake or less awake. And that what our task really is as artists is to pay attention to this and to capture that energy. So there's a lot, I guess, that we could say about these longer periods of time and how that can be beneficial to kind of really protecting our creative space. As I said, when you get distracted by someone and you're in creative flow, it's very frustrating. But I think the real thing to pay attention to is that smaller amounts of time do actually map on pretty well to how you would actually capture a lot of creative energy. So if you read a book such as Tony Schwartz, The Power of Full Engagement, that book really talks about how a lot of high-performance athletes and a lot of people who need to focus, and I think artists map onto that very nicely, that often what you do want to do is pay more attention to those ultradian rhythms and make sure that you are at any point you can relaxing and disengaging. The difference there between someone distracting you from your creative space and your creative flow and that perfect, happy, artistic existence is that when you're distracted, you are not in control of that. And it feels very much as if that's super frustrating. But if you do that yourself and actually set that rhythm and keep and stick to it and build that muscle, and it could be, again, it could be 15 minutes, it could be half an hour, it could be 50 minutes. A lot of this depends on how your life functions and where you can find that little amount of time to kind of build and chip away at stuff with. But that actually, if you engage and disengage yourself and you build that muscle, it's a lot less like getting distracted all the time. And it's a lot more like you just harnessing the natural rhythms within your body to engage and focus and then disengage and relax. So even though I think there's a lot of truth to the fact that having a nice, protected amount of time in your schedule to really work on your artistic practice is good, most science would say you're actually better to break that up into kind of 1 hour sessions anyway and sort of take a lot of breaks and like fully engage and then fully disengage, avoid multitasking. And what we can see is that actually there's quite a lot of ability to kind of match smaller artistic sessions onto that optimal ability to focus. It really is just a matter of building that muscle of engaging and disengaging. So if we go back to what I was describing of my early experience of managing this artistic creative experience of like going into flow, feeling as if I'm in the zone, everything's working, everything's flowing well, is that this is just a muscle you need to build. And over the years, I certainly got better and better personally at understanding how to go into that creative state and then how to exit it and then how to go back in. And I think this is just one of these things that often is a little bit mysticized. We don't often focus a lot on how to actually make this happen, but you can. This is just a matter of habit. What we're doing is just building that muscle and building the series of expectations, the habits, the rituals within you to understand it's go time. And I'm going to go for 10 or 15 minutes and I have a good expectation of what I'm going to achieve. And then I'm going to stop and then I'm going to relax and I'm going to stop doing it. And like anything else, this is a muscle. The first few times you work out, it's going to hurt. It's not going to work. But that ultimately, this is just something that will actually allow you to build a good unit of work where if you practice, again, it depends on what it is for you. It could be, as I said, 15 minutes, 30 minutes, like 45 minutes, like an hour, depending on how fractured and scattered your life is and where you can sort of find that time. But redefine that unit of work and understand that great things can be created and maybe should be created and would be better created in smaller sprints of highly focused time versus just a giant blob of kind of 9 to 5, like meh, unfocused time. And that although there's a lot of reasons why we may look up to having protected creative time because no one's going to distract us, that if you build a good ability to go into and out of creative flow, into and out of being in the zone, then that's something that you can carry with you. And as we'll talk about, there's a lot of really powerful things that happen once you kind of sort all of this nonsense out and get it working in your life. Now, you may be saying, okay, like, yeah, I kind of get that. It kind of makes sense, but maybe I think a lot of us as artists want to feel creative and more spontaneous. And maybe we don't want to be this kind of hyper productive, like productive bro. You know, there's a lot of this kind of Silicon Valley hustle culture sort of focus stuff. And I think it is easy to kind of view that as like, maybe we're like making that more complicated than it needs to be. And like maybe you should just build, you know, these kind of longer artistic sessions and maybe this is not for you. So let me talk a little bit about why I don't think this is just something that will like help you get a little bit more work done here or there, but that building this muscle of chipping away at something, going into and out of creative flow, artistic being in the zone, like whatever you want to call it, is actually something that I think has a huge number of benefits. So like even if you do have longer artistic sessions that are possible for you, what I'm going to do is try and make the case for how this is actually something you should do anyway. So the first thing to understand is that often part of that friction that we have when it comes to sitting down. So if I sort of go to sit down, and this would happen to me, I was working on the first comic book that I was ever really sort of professionally working on. And often what happens, this was the Seven Pirates book, and I was working for a French publisher, and I was kind of on deadline, and I was not really doing a good job of staying on my deadline. I mean, I think that book kind of took me 2 years and it should have taken a year, right? So it's significantly messing up these deadlines and not being really professional about it. And I think often the experience that I would have back then is that there would just be a lot of friction between me just kind of going about and doing my day and doing my sort of stuff that wasn't art. Because again, often when you're not used to being a professional artist, like this idea of just sitting down, doing the work and sort of everything kind of turns out well and you have a lot of your craft sorted and we're very unlikely to kind of make a huge amount of mistakes and it's not going to crash and burn. Like that's often the experience of someone who's been working for 20 or 30 years is you just kind of like sit down, you do it, right? In the beginning, it's a lot more frustrating because often we don't have the craft. Often you sit down and everything's kind of not working and you kind of just can be pulling your hair out, like scrunching up the paper. It can be like very frustrating. And a lot of that is linked to us not really having those muscles built of going into creative flow, of actually engaging and disengaging. And often the other thing is like, I find this so often happens with people is that when you do get into that really good creative mindset, it does feel like I gotta milk this for all it's worth. I gotta keep going. Like don't stop. And I think this often means that we burn out. It's much more effective to build that muscle of going into and out of creative flow and do that through 1 hour sessions or even 2 hour sessions can be pretty good, but then like disengaging, like take a break, consciously take a break, force yourself to take yourself away from the work, to relax, chill out, and then go into it again. That this is often the thing that will make a difference because it removes that friction. And a lot of what I'm talking about here of like building that muscle is to remove the friction of picking up that large object, of just saying, hey, I'm going to go and draw. Right? Like you just pick up your sketchbook, right? Pick up sketchbook, draw, sit down at my workstation and I'm just going to draw my comic and I'm just going to be drawing the finished lines, the finished pages and it's not a big deal. Is that there is a lot of going into that creative flow happening there. And not just that, but also making sure that our hand-eye coordination is worked out, that our hand is warm, that everything's kind of like warmed up. And I think this is really the key here, is that often when we fail to get into good creative mindset. So for me, again, I was working on my 7 Pirates comic and I'd be like sitting down, I'd be like, okay, I got to draw this thing. I got to draw like pirate ships and pirates and all this kind of stuff. I sit down to do it and it's like not working. And it's often that friction that we have that means like we become afraid of the creative process a little bit, or at least this was for me. Again, let me know in the comments, send me an email, tim@thedrawingcodex.com. Let me know your experience of this. But for me, this was a thing that would happen is like I would develop a lot of fear and apprehension about sitting down, right? I'd have my little drawing desk there, have all my pencils, I'd have everything kind of sorted. And I may have been having a really good experience with this, but then the weekend would come, I'd take a little break or I get distracted. Or this can also happen for people is like, I'm still doing art, but maybe I'm coloring the comic book. Maybe I'm doing a whole bunch of scanning or production stuff for a couple of days. Often this would happen to me is the weekend would come, I'd kind of stop working a little bit. I'd go do other things. I'd come back and then I'd be like scanning for a day or doing some other sort of menial task. And then maybe the next day I'd be doing some coloring. And all of a sudden, like I haven't actually really sat down to draw for 4 days, 5 days, maybe 6 days. And like, if you mess that up and then maybe it's a whole week and then like, it's kind of like 9 days since I've drawn really properly. And that's when that friction comes because our hand is not warmed up. We don't have our hand-eye coordination synced. I've kind of lost all the context for what I'm doing. And what I normally recommend to people is like, if you come back to a creative project after a little bit of time away, like give yourself 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, like 4 hours sometimes is what it would take me back in the day to really get back into that creative flow and be like, okay, this is how I draw a pirate ship. Like I remember my perspective, I remember my anatomy, my hand-eye coordination is functioning. And there's just often, the more we leave it, the more there is this creative friction when it comes to sitting down and just being able to draw and make cool stuff. And I think often we become so afraid of that friction point that you kind of put it off, right? And we also try and make sure that when we are sitting down that I have an extended period of time. So what often happens, again, let me know in the comments whether this has happened to you, is I can sit down, like if I haven't drawn for like 9 days just through no fault of my own, I'm a professional artist, I'm literally doing this full time, but there would be frequently times where like I haven't really drawn something from scratch for a week or two. I've been doing other stuff. And then I sit down and maybe I only have 2 hours to work because I've got to do 2 hours here and then I'm going to do something else. So often, like, you can spend a whole creative session and it's only towards the end of it where you really start to feel like, oh, that's how you draw. I remember. So this is often the kind of mental gymnastics that happens where unless I kind of have like a full day to sit down, it's like I don't want to do it because I don't want to go through the fire. I don't want to draw all those sucky drawings. And then I'd have to kind of also say, well, I don't actually want to work on my finished work. Like I don't want to touch a finished page because it's going to be average. It's not going to be as good as I want. And just as a little sort of aside, like one of the things people often ask me, like, how do you know when you're a professional artist? Like, is this professional? Is this not? Like you can get people to pay you to do work. The thing that really turned a corner for me and made me feel as if I was a professional is that even when I felt like I wasn't firing on all cylinders, I'd still be able to work on that finished page, on that finished work. And like, it was good enough that no one would probably look at it who wasn't me or who wasn't an artist and be like, that is terrible. It's like, yeah, it would take me a little while to warm up, but the work that I was doing was like still shippable, right? It was still professional quality. Whereas like in the beginning, yeah, like I didn't want to work on my actual project, on my actual finished work, because I knew unless I warmed up or did some warm-up sketching or something else, that, yeah, like I would just be producing work that I probably have to throw away. And if this is a literal, like in this case, back in the day, these were literal pages. Like this was me drawing the finished lines on the finished thing. So this often is what happens is we get so caught up in the mental gymnastics of like having to get into the right creative mindset that we kind of don't start. One of the best things about developing a little sketching ritual and building that muscle of like pick up the sketchbook, pick up your iPad, do some drawing, either do some sketching or like chip away at a larger illustration or like whatever you want to do, is that it reduces that friction. So I think that staying connected to your art is really critical here over the long term, because one of the things I noticed is the more that I would build my sketchbooking habit, which is, this is kind of connected to, it would mean that over that weekend and over those days when I was scanning or doing coloring, I was still drawing. I was still sketching. I was still having fun. I was still connected with like being an artist, right? I was a professional artist who, due to my professionalism, was not actually drawing, right? Because I had to do other professional artist tasks. But because I built up that habit of like having the sketchbook work, it just meant that I was connected to the artistic process. And then when I have to sit down after those 9 days of not drawing, there wasn't that massive friction. Like I was still doing a little bit. So I think the idea of building that muscle of like open up the sketchbook, go into flow, do some work, again, it's going to suck the first 100 or 1,000 times you do it, right? But ultimately, like building that ability to just kind of have the page sitting around, have your sketchbook sitting around, and like you just naturally pick it up. There's no friction there. You just kind of start drawing and you're not really thinking about it. There's not this giant weight of you sitting down and being all rusty, kind of sitting over you, like hanging over you, and that kind of making it put even more pressure on you. Because the reality is that ultimately having that tension and friction will reduce. This is the irony of it, is that it reduces your ability to go into flow because you're worried, you're thinking about it. There's a certain degree to where like a lot of being in flow is like chilling out. It's like relaxing. It's like a very particular state of mind, and a lot of tension or a lot of thinking of like, oh, I'm going to suck at this drawing, or this is not going to work. A lot of that stuff will actually stop you being able to do the thing that you want to do. So reducing that friction is not just something that like, oh, it's kind of good to be more productive or like optimize the ultradian rhythm. It's actually something that will enhance your overall creativity to the point where, like, ultimately, as artists, I think what we often want is to be able to just be creative. There's a bit of paper there. There's a pen there. What happens? I put them together. Like, that's just the natural state, right? If you see pencil and paper or whatever it is your artistic medium, if you see them lying there, your natural draw is to just put those things together to make something. And that is effortless, easy, fun, enjoyable, and just a natural part of, there's no tension there. That's just so what happens, right? You just sort of pick it up and draw. And often I think, a lot of the people that we really look up to as artists who sort of embody that creative spirit, right? The late Kim Jung-gi. I think a reason that often that feeling of like, I'm kind of just doodling, right? I'm just kind of drawing and it feels like we're having fun. There's no plan there. It's just that feels like this kind of natural drawing that we often want to be able to produce as artists. There's something really romantic about that idea. And a lot of that comes from just drawing a lot. That if you can build that muscle of like, hey, here's a pen, here's a pad, put them together. It's effortless and easy. I think that's often what we're after in the beginning. And building up these fundamental skills, although it can seem a little bit productivity bro, is ultimately one of the best ways to feel really, really creatively fulfilled. Another reason I think this can be really critical for your overall artistic success and to have a really good relationship with art is that if you get that loop happening where you see pencil and paper or whatever it is, and you just start drawing, it does open up a little bit of a dopamine loop. And one of the best things about art is it kind of is a bit addicting. Like when you get to it, you kind of start to see every blank page as an opportunity. When there's not that friction to create and when you're not worried about it, it creates a lot of possibility in your life because you can just start to replace the idea of doom scrolling or wasting your time watching stuff or engaging in things that are more consumptive. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. But if you're a bit frustrated with your inability to separate yourself from those dopamine loops of scrolling social media or sort of playing video games and you want to get more art done, a big thing that can help is to kind of make that creative loop far more interesting. So a lot of what they do when they're creating games and dopamine loops and trying to really make sure that you gamify everything is you're trying to get to a ding, right? You're trying to get to ding, next level. You're trying to get some sense of like, oh, something is progressing, something's changing. We love transformation. We love change. We love leveling up as late stage hominids. And I think that making sketching where like, oh, I open up my sketchbook, now there's an open dopamine loop and I draw something there. And then like once that page is full, it's done. That can be just immensely fun once you get used to it. Again, the first 1,000 times you do this, it's going to suck, right? It's maybe not going to work as well as you want, but like the value of building that muscle of really training yourself to say, what can I do? Okay, I've got 10 minutes here. I've got 5 minutes here. I've got 15 minutes here. I've got half an hour, 45, like whatever it is. You get better and better. And one of the fundamental skills here that you will build is just being able to look at a blank page, look at a space that you could do a drawing in, understand the amount of time you have, set a good expectation of what a result could be, and then do that. And if you do that hundreds of times, you'll get really good at saying, I reckon I could finish something in like 5 minutes. Go look at the great animators, the great two-dimensional animators of our time who are able to just draw something really fun in like 5 minutes, who are able to sort of create magic with these kind of rough, sketchy drawings. It's all a matter of just expectation, of being able to fit what you want into that amount of time. And the more that you build that muscle, the more that you figure out what you can do, the more it will be like a dopamine loop, where like literally picking up your sketchbook and drawing, or like picking up your sketchbook and, as we'll talk about, like chipping away at a larger illustration is really, really fun, really engaging. And because you're setting a good endpoint, a good expectation, it starts to take on a lot of that dopamine loop stuff. But instead of playing video games or doing these other things that maybe we want to reduce in our life, we're doing art. And at the end of the month, at the end of the year, you'll find you've done way more things and that you're engaging in that creative practice and actually being an artist. A lot of us struggle with identity when it comes to artists and like, am I professional? Is this good enough? Is this bad? Like the bottom line is, if you do it, you are an artist, right? If you spend a lot of time doing this, you are. Like that's what defines us, is that we make things, that we create things. And I think, again, as I said, it doesn't matter like whether I'm a professional artist. Often I feel like I'm not being an artist this week because I didn't make anything. I was just doing a bunch of other paraphernalia. Ultimately, spending a lot of time and building this muscle is just one of the things that will connect you to the creative process, to who you are as an artist, and allow you to explore that on a day-to-day basis. All right. Now, after all of that, you may be sitting there going like, okay, I get it. Like that also makes sense, that it's also good for other things. But are we just talking about here sketching and sketchbooking? Like, as I said, this is a good way to think of it, is like you can keep a really good sketchbook habit this way. But I think there's two other things to consider here. And this is that by chipping away at something, I think you'll find if you build the muscle for this as well. So probably the first step is just getting used to like opening the sketchbook up. We can look at this as like the first stage of this. Open up sketchbook, get pencil, carry these around with you, right? Develop a mobile sketching system. What I like to call, again, in the Line and Color Academy, I call this a simple sketching system. And there's lots of different ways you can do this. From the cheapest way is like get a whole stack of printer paper, a cheap mechanical pencil, and a little kind of folder clipboardy thing. Away you go, right? Like just like carry that round wherever you go, and you'll find, again, you can just do a whole bunch of sketches. It's super fun. When one doesn't work, you scrunch it up and throw it away. When one does, you kind of like store it in a nice spot, scan it, whatever. Or, you can spend hundreds of dollars on like fancy gear, get a nice bag for it all. Really, it makes almost no difference to your creative experience. Again, often cheaper materials here can be more fun. You're not worried about losing them. You're not worried about them getting damaged. But either way, I guess like we could look at that as like that's the first stage of this. It's like just build the muscle. Pick up a sketchbook, do a drawing, whatever it is. The next stage here, though, is like, okay, what you find is you can actually work on larger pieces. You can do what I like to call chip away at it. And this is something I've been doing. This image, again, you probably can't see this on the podcast version, but if you're on YouTube, there's an image behind me. It's of like a girl in a forest, and there's this kind of like alien creature there. And this is an image that I did using this technique that I like to call the chip away method. And what I did is I just, every time I had 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, here or there over the week, I would try and work on a single kind of illustration, like pretty basic. And my goal was to say, okay, I haven't been doing much personal work for me. And this is very frustrating because I'm drawing all the time, but a lot of the comics I'm working on aren't super visible. Like not a lot of people know the comic that I'm working on. And I've been storyboarding a 156-page graphic novel for like the last sort of 6 months, it feels like. Before that, last year, I was doing a whole bunch of storyboarding. I haven't done a lot of personal work. I haven't really shown up. I haven't done anything. And I just wanted to post some work online. So I said, well, okay. One of the skills I developed a while ago was being able to create these kind of illustrations in 3 to 4 hours. And I was like, I reckon I could find 3 or 4 hours in a week, but just not as one big chunk of time. So this is what I did, is I know the process, and this is really key, and I'm going to unpack this because I think this is such an important aspect, is that if you have a simple, reliable process, if you know how to make things, and this could just be, hey, pencil, paper, I'm doing a sketch, or it could be I'm making an illustration. Often what defines our ability to create larger illustrations, to create larger projects, is chunking them down. So what I would find is I would just do my thumbnail. And sometimes I get disrupted halfway through that and I have to stop. But I know the next stage is like finish the thumbnail. And after the thumbnail, then I know that I can just kind of blow that up on my iPad. And then I can start doing the construction drawing. Once I finish the construction drawing, then I can do the finished lines. Once I do the finished lines, then I can add the flat color. Once I've had the flat color, then I can think about adding those kind of finishing touches. And then I can take it all into Photoshop and add a bit more texture and tweak the colors even more. Put some fun titles on it and stuff. Away you go. So all those are little processes and steps along the way. And I know that probably if I'm spending 3 hours on a piece, maybe the thumbnail is going to take me 10 minutes, 20 minutes. The construction drawing might take me an hour. The lines may take me an hour. The color might take me an hour, something like that. So it kind of means that, look, I might be able to work on a bit of that construction drawing for half an hour here, for 15 minutes. And this is very fragmented because sometimes I get distracted. Sometimes I'm just literally leaving this on the kitchen table. I'm taking it with me. You got to wait in the car for 15 minutes. But it's not the ideal creative time. But what I found is I was able to actually complete these. And sometimes I'd have a whole bunch of shotgun style 5-minute sessions and I'd be sort of maybe not having the best creative time. But sometimes I'd find I just kind of pick this thing up and hey, there's no one's around. Nothing's going to stop me. And I'd just be able to work for an hour or hour and a half on it. And what I found is that experience of being able to chip away at that over the week meant that at the end of the week, I had this image and I was like, this is really cool. This has been really fun. Some of that creative time was maybe not the best. Again, it was that feeling of I'm getting interrupted. But overall, I was really happy to be able to get that done. And I think building that muscle is what has allowed me to be able to create more work kind of out of nothing, right? Again, we probably all have an extra 2 or 3 hours throughout the week to do this kind of stuff. And the reality is we're often just not using it because we don't have this ability to chunk down the things that we're working on. Now, again, that sounds a bit productivity bro, a bit sort of hustle culture, a bit sort of transactional. But here's the thing. I think this is a really important idea, is that often if you do want to create larger works that have more meaning, that have more scope, if you're trying to create a larger illustration even, often what you need to do is break it up. You need to break it up anyway into little sections. Why? Because this is what gives us that little dopamine loop, this little tick. I finished this phase, I'm here, I'm there, I'm stepping through the process, I'm making progress. Your ability to do that for a single illustration is often what will allow you to know where you are, to pick it up over the evening, right? If you start working on something, then you have to stop and you take a couple of days break. It's really challenging often to pick that up and know where you are. Having a process and being able to break that down into smaller chunks is actually really, really important. So I think that being able to do that just on a single illustration. So if you think about, hey, you just pick up your sketchbook, maybe you're not sketching away for 10 or 15 minutes, but maybe you're kind of building a drawing up over a longer period of time. Maybe I'll do my initial lay-in, then I'll add my secondary details, then I'll add my tertiary details, then I'll think about texture and rendering it. And then you can sort of say, hey, I'm just going to work on the face for 10 minutes, work on this hand for 5 minutes. Then I'm just going to refine the textures for another 10 minutes. It's often good to do that anyway if you are working even over a long period of time. If you have 5 hours of uninterrupted time, it is good to take breaks. It is good to break up the things you're doing and say, okay, now I'm going to do this, now I'm going to do that. Otherwise, you can easily spend 5 hours noodling on some little thing that doesn't make any difference. Often, if you actually want to get a lot of art done, if it's not just art therapy, if you're actually trying to make things, you do need to think about productivity. You do need to break it up. You do need to chunk these things down. So I think that you could use these 10-minute, 15-minute, half an hour sessions to work on a larger drawing in your sketchbook or even a longer illustration. And that if you actually put this into practice at the end of the week, at the end of the month, you might find you have a significantly larger amount of personal work done or work on your project completed. Now, none of this is as important as this last point that I'm going to make though, because a lot of that, again, talks to our ability to engage in the creative practice, to feel better as we're drawing. It's all really important. But the real key here is that often what we want to do with our art is make something significant, make a larger piece. This could be a series of pieces. It could be a series of prints, a comic book, an illustrated book, a world-building tome, an art book, whatever it is. We are often really trying to create a body of work that is going to make a difference. And the reality is, and this is the same, you get this same advice for people who are doing entrepreneurial things, like making businesses, who are making new products. You kind of need to be in it for long term. That there will be a lot of these periods along the way where it feels as if you are just kind of slogging through, that there's just an endless little sea of tasks. And that often what you need to do in order to create a large project is very similar to what we're talking about, which is you take the task that you're trying to achieve, your illustration, your book, your comic book, and you need to break it up into a whole bunch of little tasks. And then you just need to put one foot in front of the other and just chip away at it. This concept of just chipping away at a larger illustration, at a larger piece, being able to put in little efforts here or there, when we have a small amount of time, this is what will allow us to create anything. But the sad reality is that most people who have 16 hours a day to work on their art don't do a very good job of utilizing it. And most people who do, even with a full workload, if they really apply themselves to something meaning, something big, something important, they're just not able to really make it move. Like it just doesn't actually get done. The ability to chunk things down, to chip away at a larger project is just what actually finishing things looks like. If you look at any of the video games I've worked on as like a small little part of a larger team, it takes so long. And you do need to have a vision. You need to have a thumbnail, a plan. You need to understand the process of how you're going to get from where you are to that finished product. You need to chop it down into the smallest possible task so that you can feel as if, hey, ding, 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 I'm making progress. Things are moving forward. I'm getting better and better. You need to feel that every time. Otherwise, you just get lost along the way. So the real thing that I think is important to understand is that building this muscle of engaging your creative process, of going into flow, of working on these smaller tasks is something that will actually help you build a much larger and more important skill, which is just understanding that through chipping away at something, you're going to be able to achieve something much greater. And that this skill fundamentally applies to you if you are sitting down for 5 or 6 hours a day, every day over 3 years, to creating something really important and really big. That this is a mindset shift we all need to make as artists. That what it feels like when you're working on a large project is that you're just kind of chipping away at this thing and nothing is happening, nothing's moving, until right at the end you're like, actually, there's this finished thing there. And that's very much what it feels to me like when I do work on these illustrations over a week, where I'm just like chipping away at it here and like this thing worked, and then I get distracted, and then maybe I didn't quite have enough time, and then I had to finish it anyway. And I had to find that time and sort of manifest that time from somewhere, or utilize a whole bunch of little 5-minute times. Again, like these are the struggles that we go through when we're working on larger projects. And I think that building this muscle and just understanding this mindset shift is something that will allow you to much more easily take on those larger projects. Because trust me, anytime you're really doing something big that is important to you, you're going to face all of these challenges. So that's the last thing I'll leave you with here, is just that this is fundamentally the same skill that you're going to need to take on a much, much larger project. And it all starts with just opening up your sketchbook and being able to put pencil to paper for 5 or 10 minutes. Okay, let's do a couple of quick takeaways before we bounce out of here. Firstly, if we look at this from an analytical point of view, I've covered a lot of the things that I guess could be scientific or evidence-based or based on data and observations, where we can really see the benefit of trying to at least master the skill of being able to work for shorter periods of time. But more importantly, again, this could be 5, 10, 15 minutes. It could be half an hour. It could be 50 minutes. It could be 90 minutes. You really have to figure out kind of what works for you, what works with your life. But either way, this is a skill that if you build, it will really allow you to get more done and avoid a bit of that creative mysticism that is involved with me having to capture the creative experience. Like now I'm in the zone, right? You kind of got into that ephemeral, slippery state and you kind of need to hold on for dear life. And often what happens that really will wreck us is that we kind of hold on to that too long and we do fatigue, and almost you actually kind of get into this state where like you fatigue by default because you are so afraid of kind of stopping. And when you're in a good state of flow, when everything's kind of working, we don't want to stop. But the reality is, if you stop earlier than that, it trains your mind to go into and out of that state. And it also trains your mind to trust that you can go into creative flow, knowing that it's going to stop, that you are going to stop and take a break. And that engaging and disengaging, I think, is a really powerful thing to understand. It allows you to focus more over the long term. And it means that when you do just open up that sketchbook, you are knowing that it's going to stop, it's going to end, and that allows you to go into a much deeper level of focus. There's a lot of data, there's a lot of science, I guess we could say, on that. And I think that is really one of the linchpins that underlines a lot of this kind of basic thing that I'm saying. It's also good to understand that skill development often happens over a long period of time, and that a lot of where you're going to maximize your skill development and that feeling of like building that muscle and this being a natural thing is through understanding that we're probably going to internalize these habits while we sleep. So you're actually much better off, even if you only do a bit of sketching every day, to just build that muscle over time. And it'll probably happen a lot quicker than you think if you are actually just doing it day in, day out. You're probably going to find more skill development will happen if you do a little bit each day versus kind of one long session on one day, for instance. The other thing to understand here is that a lot of these flow states and getting into that creative mindset are trainable responses. Now, everyone's different. Everyone is neurologically diverse in the way you're going to approach this, in the way habits are easier or harder to build. You kind of know how you work, but I think it's easy to, from my own experience and what I've sort of read, understand that really this is just a state that you train yourself to go into. And it's just a matter of, I think, trusting that process of disengaging. A lot of what will allow you to engage the creative state is to make sure you purposefully disengage. And this really is the difference between you just kind of getting distracted a lot and feeling like I need to protect my creative space, is if you choose to engage and open up the sketchbook and draw, and then you choose to close it, even though it feels like every time you're closing it that like, I should just keep going, the more you build that muscle of closing it and stopping and then opening it up again and going back, the easier the whole thing becomes. And the more the concept of like opening up and closing and starting and stopping just sort of disappears. Like there really is no difference between me drawing or not drawing or whatever. You just pick up the pencil. It all happens naturally because like, why wouldn't it? If you want to look at this from a really simple bro level point of view, it's that no matter what stage you're at, no matter what you want to achieve, it's always going to be built by small efforts, by chipping away at that larger process. And the more that you can get good at these little small steps, the better everything is going to be. That big things are fundamentally created by a lot of small ones. All right, if we want a couple of really practical things, like what can you actually go away and do? I look at this, as I kind of suggested, as 3 stages. Firstly, just get good at picking up the sketchbook, doing a little bit of drawing, and then closing it, and just see what happens. And as I said, this is not do it 5 times, this is do it 1,000 times, right? This is build that creative muscle, keep experimenting, keep playing, keep thinking and working through that process, see what works. I think the second stage of this is looking at maybe when you want to carry over a drawing from multiple sessions to just build that ability to kind of say, okay, I'm going to stop. And that's okay. And it will feel really weird in the beginning to kind of like stop your drawing and then pick it up. But I think this is a really important skill to build. The next thing that I think we can do there as part of that second step is to get used to kind of breaking down whatever your artistic process is into a series of kind of recognizable, reliable, repeatable steps. This is something I believe in a lot. I think it's what often defines a lot of professional artists is they often have battle-tested, reliable processes that we're just kind of stepping through. Even the ones who are super experimental, right? There is a process to everything. I think this is just a fundamental aspect of creation and being creative. So just get good at breaking down whatever you're doing into those little sections, right? So you're doing a drawing, maybe it's going to take you an hour. How could you break that down into a bunch of little 10-minute steps? And this will seem analytical in the beginning, but as with a lot of these other things, eventually this disappears into the creative process and you're just kind of stepping through a number of steps, but you kind of know where you are along the way. Now, the last stage of this is to maybe be a little bit more structured in the way that you break down even larger projects and see if you can parlay a lot of this stuff that you've been building into a series of works, a series of things that are connected. That maybe if you really think about what you're trying to create, that's a little bit larger, and this could be a much larger illustration, something that's more in that 3, 4, 5 hour range. Or you could also, once you get good at this, really chop a giant project into a whole bunch of little steps and just kind of get used to this idea. I think the more that you do this, the more you'll be able to slowly build that muscle and that understanding. So we're after two key things here that you want to build. One is that ability to just open up your sketchbook, keep drawing, getting used to that process. And I think that really is the fundamental muscle you build. The second thing is just, I guess, more of a conceptual mindset where you're understanding that large illustrations are a series of small steps and that large projects are a series of small steps, whether it's an animated film, a live action film, a comic book project, a novel you're writing, a series of three-dimensional prints that you're creating, that you want to create a series of toys out of, like whatever it is, there's a bunch of steps that you need to break down. And that often, if you just really get good at thinking about it that way, these are the skills that you'll be able to parlay into actual production. Now, the problem is, I think in the beginning, we often look at that and it seems like infinitely complicated and technical and antithetical to the artistic existence. But the reality is, as I've said, if you trust in that process, what you'll find is that structure disappears. That there is really no difference between me drawing or not drawing. I'm just drawing here and then I'm drawing there. I'm working on a larger project just through a million little steps. That's just kind of how it's done. And the more you get good at this, the more that structure disappears and the more you're able to see the whole creative endeavor as one large thing, even though you are sort of chunking it down into a million small ones. Again, it's a little bit Zen, but yeah, I think that's often how it works. Let me know what your experiences of this have been in the comments down below. Lastly, if we look at this from a philosophical or spiritual point of view, there's a million different things I could probably say here. A lot of me wants to kind of comment on how the 9-to-5 workday that is part of modern industrialized society is maybe not that well suited to the artistic existence or any existence, and there's a lot of problems with that. But ultimately, I think the real takeaway here is just to understand that the way that you're able to capture creative energy, I think, is a much more important factor of your overall productive ability, right? It's less a matter of kind of fitting into this box of like, I'm working for this amount of time. And it's more a matter of saying like, look, we're all different. Some of us can spend 12 hours a day working in a studio. Other people can't. You have a mix of family responsibilities, personal responsibilities. You may have a particular way that really fires up your creative energy, and it's maybe not involved with grinding away and doing production work all day. Like, who knows? We're all different. But really, this is a matter of understanding that the more flexibility you have, like if you know that you can open up your sketchbook, that you can be creative in 5 minutes, 10 minutes, half an hour, or whatever, and that can be a really functional unit of work, it gives you so much more flexibility. And I think the more flexibility you have, the more you're going to be able to stay connected to your creative self over the long term. And I think the more you do that, the more creative you're ultimately going to be. The other thing to understand here is there's a lot of wisdom when it comes to understanding that great things are created one step at a time. This is often a major misconception that people have, that you need to grind away and kind of spend all day, every day, and that you can just kind of push through and finish this thing. Very quickly, you get to a point where no amount of consistent, like epic sprinting is going to help. That this is a long game, that this is a marathon, and you need to marshal your energy. A long time ago, I got really stuck into the idea of like pushing and burning out on deadlines. And this is how I'd finish a lot of my sort of comic book projects. I need to get paid by the end of the month. And then I was like, oh man, I need to ship a bunch of pages to my editor to sort of sign off so I can get paid. So I'd grind and like burn the midnight oil for like the last few weeks. And then I'd kind of, then I'd be done. I'd be completely burned out for a couple of days and I'd have to rest. And I think after a while, I kind of realized that like, no, you kind of just have to take this one step at a time. That this is ultimately what happens, right? Ultimately, you have to build this ability to pace yourself, to stop work, to start work, to pace it out, to understand that no matter how big it is, you can chunk it down into a million little bits and just kind of chew on them one at a time. And that this is what's going to allow you to be more consistent. Because like a marathon or like any of these kind of long games, it's much more about consistency than it is about these massive efforts and massive pushes. That this really is just a matter of being practical. And this is so important to understand, is once you do really understand your processes, the process disappears. And what you have at the end is just the fun of creation. Anyway, that's all we've got time for on this particular episode. I really wanted to put this particular one together because this is something I have been experimenting with lately. I notice a lot of the people that I talk to as students, people in comments here, people in the communities, people in the Mighty Artisan community, a lot of people struggle with this. We don't all have time. And I really think that this is one of these things that connects us, right? There's so many people where like people are like 18, 19, they have all the time in the world and they're really struggling to put all that time in the world into a proper effort. And so many other people are professional artists. Like we're literally sitting here all day, every day making art. And then it feels sometimes like we're not making any art because we're often doing production. We're not really being creative. We're not understanding ourselves. And there's a lot of people who are just doing this as a hobby, or you're just trying to do it on the side. You're trying to make something out of it. You're trying to build a new folio, get to that next level. Often, I think so often we see that what we need to do is build that ability to kind of work on things on the side. And I think more than that is that I feel like the modern industrialized society has this metaphor that we kind of pulled into where it's like, here's my main thing and here's the thing that I do on the side. And I really think that ultimately part of what we need to do as artists is just understand that like making art and filling our life with the act of making things and just picking up that pencil and drawing on the paper, it's just the natural state that we should be in. And it's not a matter of like, oh, I have my side project or my personal project. It's just that the more we can get good at making art as much as possible and having fun with it, the better. So this is one of these things I know a lot of us struggle with. Hopefully this idea will help you. Let me know whether you try it out, whether you maybe get a little bit frustrated. Again, as I said, it may take 1,000 times to get some progress with this, but give it a go. Let me know how it goes. Leave me a comment down below. Send me an email, tim@thedrawingcodex.com. Be really keen to hear your thoughts on this one. Other than that, I'll see you around in the next one.